What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is The Deep Dive. And we are in week 2 of our Riptide series. And today's, what we're covering is the Far From Shore sermon.
Far From Shore, yeah.
And
meat of the story this week. Yeah.
Do what? I'm sorry?
It was kind of the meat of the story this week. Yeah.
It was a good sermon. I really liked it. And I'm ready to get into it. How about you?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, Dave, I don't know if you could tell I'm a little sun-kissed. Hopefully you can't see too much of the skin peeling off my nose. I did do some face scrubbing yesterday, and
I know y'all. Nick, if you guys don't know, Nick just got back from a week at the beach down at Cocoa Beach, and I enjoyed talking to Rachel about y'all's escapade yesterday. I know y'all saw a rocket launch. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it was cool. We were on a boat. It was fun to just watch, but it was pretty trippy because we could see everything before we could actually hear it. About 3 or 4 minutes later, you'd hear the rumbling and all that stuff. It was cool though. I've never seen a rocket launch, so that was one of those bucket list items checked for me. So that was cool.
Nice, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I got to see one time as well. It was at night. I saw a space shuttle launch at night one time, and unforgettable experience. It was just that power that it takes to.
I know. Yeah, when so the kids who were on the boat with us, there's about 6 or 7 other kids, and where the spaceships kind of separate that first wave or so, they were like, "Did everything explode? Yeah. Is this bad?" And we're all like, "No, we're good. Chill, take a chill." But we had a really good time, and it was good to get away and just good to spend some time on the ocean.
Well, it's good to have you back. I missed you, Nick.
Thanks.
It's
glad to be back.
Not the same in the office without you, so glad you're back. Yeah.
Well, Dave, why don't you kind of give us a breakdown of the sermon a little bit, and then we'll jump into some deep dive stuff.
All right. So the title of the sermon series is Riptide.
Yep.
The first week we looked at warning signs, and just backing up just a second, Riptide, the metaphor that we're using is that when you go to the beach, as you just did, that most people are much more afraid of sharks, in a shark attack, which is a, quick thing, but rare.
Yeah.
Hardly ever happens. The thing that's really can be dangerous at the beach are the rip currents or the riptides. And so that, the way in which they work, the subtlety of just being out in the surf and having fun, and you get just a little drift and a little drift and a little drift until suddenly you're far out, you're in it, and you can't get back. And so when we look at things that we struggle with in life, or places where we've gone adrift, places where we have decisions, or have done things that we wish we could do over. Many times it has to do with this slow drift. One bad decision, one little bad decision,
right? Then
one maybe a little bit bigger bad decision, and suddenly we're in a whole mess of trouble. And so being far from the shore is sort of where we picked it up last week. And I think one of the points that I made about that is that the most dangerous riptide that we can be in is one that we don't know we're in.
Yeah.
We'd spent a good bit of time last week talking about warning signs and flags to look out for, but so oftentimes if you're just out there and there's none of that, you can get in a situation, and if you don't know it's there, suddenly you're being carried away, such as is literally with riptides, but so much of that is true just in life in general. We make one little decision after, one little decision to suddenly they, compound. Tell one little lie, then you have to tell another little lie, and you tell another, and it gets bigger and bigger. And so that's kind of where we are.
Which is essentially kind of how David ended up where he ended up, his lies and actions and stuff like that kind of pushed him a little further away.
That's right.
I want to give you just another quick metaphor, though, is that, from being in the beach, I remember we talked about the sermon and being at the beach, I realized that even sometimes in the waves, it drifts you towards that rip current. You know what I mean? You could be in the middle of the waves. You normally go out right in front of where you set up shop, right?
Right.
But then before you know it, you could just be standing there and maybe just jumping a wave or two, and then you feel like you're 100 feet down the beach from where stuff
that
is.
that undertow's dragging you out
Yeah.
there. And one of the things I did yesterday was I actually pulled these off of some ocean safety sites, was pictures of riptides. And it's interesting to look at them because you see these waves crashing around. Then there's sort of darker, it looks a little bit more peaceful water. And so if you're at the beach and going like, well, maybe I don't want to get in those crashing waves over there, I'm going to go to this spot, which that could be the most dangerous spot for you to go to, even though it looks calmer. And so I do think there's a parallel for us in life as well. We need peaceful spots, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a chaos and there's a crashing waves. And so we might get pulled or attracted to this spot that looks calmer for us. And so maybe it's something that has felt good for us, like, going to the bar after work and drinking 3 beers. And so, that's how we unwound. Maybe, you're playing a few video games before you go, to bed at night. Little things like that, which in and of itself aren't that harmless, but when we get into it and start getting carried away, it can really lead to some destructive kind of things. And so, to me, and my wife had mentioned that because we talked about it before too. Those pictures, I think, spoke 1,000 words to me about kind of another warning sign about riptides.
Yeah,
Things that might be, we think, bringing us a relaxed place or a less chaotic place. Beware, they could be leading to something bad.
Well, yeah, and I think that was one of the big things that kind of like hooked me, I guess, as I was listening to your sermon, is looking at it, and when you said, it's the safest, or it appears to be the safest place.
It appears to be the safest place.
And
it feels calm.
It feels calm.
It feels calm. And so, a lot of things that can become bad habits, maybe a place that it's relieving stress for us, it feels calm,
Yeah.
So I liked that parallel. But, once you get into a riptide, or probably rip current is a better use of what it actually is.
Sure.
But once you get into that and get pulled out, it becomes very, very dangerous when we try to save ourselves, because our natural response is to, well, let's swim out of this thing. I'm in over my head, I got to swim out of it. But the rip current, we can't outswim.
Right.
We need help. We need, rescue, which is going to be next week's sermon. And so we've been using the story of David and the story of David and Bathsheba is sort of a parallel for this. And so last week we took just the first 5 verses. I think it's 2 Samuel chapter 10.
Something like that.
Yeah, maybe 11. I don't know. It's right in that area of 2 Samuel where the story of David and Bathsheba are. But so we just kind of took it up to where David learns that Bathsheba is pregnant. Every step of the way, there was a little bit of drift, from not going to war when he should have gone to war, to wander around the palace and seeing this woman taking a bath and not looking away, to inquiring about her. And every little thing, a little bit more drift, leads to a more difficult situation where he's going to have trouble getting out of it. And so we left off last week where he had learned the news of Bathsheba being pregnant. And so David then starts trying to save himself, trying to swim out of it. And the first thing he does is, finds out Uriah is her husband, and he's off to war. He's with all the men off to war. And so he kind of gives him a furlough, lets him come home. And he says, go home and wash your feet and, spend the night off. So wash your feet is a euphemism. And you guys can Google that. It's kind of a PG-13 or maybe R thing, but it's used in the Bible a couple of times. It means sex.
Right.
So the idea is send him home, let him have relations with his wife, and then they'll think it's his.
Right.
So Uriah won't do it, because he's thinking about the men out there, and it's unfair and it's unjust for his, I think he was a leader, so his soldiers still out there. So he spends the night at the palace. So the next morning they come and tell David that, and David goes, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, here he is trying to cover it up.
You come home, you're a man, you go home with your wife. This plan's not working.
This is what you do.
And so David then asks for Uriah, and he tries to butter him up, and he has him for a big meal and tries to
get him drunk.
He does get him drunk, and then he's going to send him home for the night because he said, well, that'll do it. But once again, Uriah doesn't go home. And so, we've had another drift. So it's going from being, real bad thing to being a more and more bad thing.
Yeah.
And so David, trying to save himself this time, sends word, put Uriah on the front lines. Put him in the most dangerous space. When you go into war, put him in a space. And so, they do that. And
the coldest part is he said, and then have your men back up once he's in the front.
Right, yeah. He does that.
All of a sudden, it's a very lonely feeling.
The other cold part about that is there are other people that died. There was collateral damage for this sin that David's trying to cover up. And so, he's killed. And so the word comes home that he's dead. And then it says that after a proper amount of grieving, he sends for Bathsheba and takes her as his wife. And so David at this point thinks he's got it solved.
Made in the shade.
But the last verse of that is that, but the Lord thought that what David had done, it was evil on the side of the Lord. And so here is this slow progression of David making one bad mistake after one bad mistake after one bad mistake. And, going back to the original point I made today, that the most dangerous Riptide is the one we don't know we're in. David was a great guy, a great leader of Israel, one of the heroes of the Bible.
Sure.
And we're in the middle of a redemption story. He looks like a pretty bad guy right now.
Yeah.
But, David, I don't think had the intent of all this happening. He just got caught up in it. And isn't that true for what happens with us too?
It is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for him, it probably felt like, and I think you made the point yesterday, that probably the most dangerous rip currents or rip tides are the ones that we don't see.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably what he realized, or probably when he got to the end, that's probably what he's looking back
and so
as he's going to redemption.
Right. And so I made 3 points of how what David did, but how it parallels how we can see it time and time again with kind of behavior we have when we get caught in a rip current and we're trying to save ourselves. And the first thing I had was, accommodations. You're trying to control the environment. And so we see David very clearly trying to control the environment around it, so that it'll keep him, doing the, being able to stay in his sin, but yet cover it up. Yeah. And then the second point that I made around this was isolation. And we see that where people, will try to isolate things or isolate themselves when they're caught in a rip current. And David is more and more isolated in what he's doing. And, I could think of countless examples of how I've seen that happen, I guess, in my own life, but certainly in my own life. But really, when you look at some big things that have happened that are out there, with some of the advertised scandals, you can see, these people that were good people. They just got off, and then one of the keys that people should see is this isolation thing that happened, and then justifying, I'm not as bad as so and so, or I'm the king, I can do what I want, however he justified it in his own mind. Yeah. God wasn't gonna let him off with that. So that's kind of where we find ourselves today. Yeah.
Well, and I think those are those are three pretty big things, and especially isolation. I feel like I've seen it time again from my time being in youth ministry to even my own life of just the places where I felt like I was maybe slipping or falling or not so good, I would find myself in isolation more, away from community, away from the people checking in on me. And whether that was because of shame or whether that was because I didn't realize it and I just needed to get away, because I'm a 9 by Enneagram standards, and I like to recharge kind of in the quiet. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I have to be careful that this isn't a justification place for me, because I could justify my withdrawal into that and just check out.
Right. And so it wasn't a place where, the chaos was around the crashing waves, right, and you're looking for a safe place to land. Right. And so that appears there in the water to be a safe place. And you can see how that happens. I, as a person who recharges by being around people, I would relate to it as where you're cutting off information private, and trying to do things in privacy. It's your wife says something about your drinking. And so rather than go home and drink, you stop at the bar on the way home so she won't see you drinking. So that's isolation. It's getting private. It's getting the credit card, getting that second credit card to pay for some bad habits. Or, I use an example of shopping yesterday that, it's one of the ways in which
really struck a nerve, by the way, on my
pew. I know. On that whole section
they all started to glare. I was like, uh-oh.
It's a tough problem. And one thing I will say, God wants us to have our best life, to have a good life. And so we sometimes kind of judge what are sins and what aren't sins. And so, some of these things, at their base level, that you don't call them a sin.
Yeah.
It's just that when it stops, when it causes broken relationships, or when it stops allowing us to have the best life that God wants us to have life in its abundance. That's where it was. And shopping is one of the places where a lot of people, including myself, can get out of control because, at the time that you purchase something, it may give you a little endorphin. It's like, gosh, I've got this. I'm cool now.
Or I caught this on a deal or whatever.
Yeah, I used to have this idea that like if I bought enough office products that I would be more organized. Rather than just getting organized, I just bought more office products. So that's a little aside. But, we do those things. We do those things. And so we try to kind of, would say, the accommodation for somebody that is trying to save themselves may be to like, okay, I've got into trouble with spending. This credit card is got 2% interest or 0% interest for 18 months. And so I'm going to get that. It's not really dealing with the problem. So, you think, okay, well, I've contained that for 18 months.
Yeah.
But at some point it's going to come back and we realize we can't outswim it. And so David did several things, and he's trying to control the environment. He's trying to make it look like that it's Uriah's baby. And then, just the ruthless thing. How do you get to that point where it's like, I got to get that guy out of the way. He could talk.
Yeah.
It's going to be bad. So, just doing the whole thing that he did there with, making sure he was on the front lines. And then the justification, which we all do. I mean, just like you think I'm bad, this person's bad. I'm really good. You're really should be grateful.
Yeah.
But
I think at the end of the day, it forces us to get real with ourselves. Yeah. Like if we really want to get out of these rip currents or rip tides and stuff like that, like there's pure action on our part, and we can't be afraid to encounter the wrong things in our world. And something I kind of appreciate is actually, I think a lot of people kind of shy away from talking about stuff like this. That, even in the places that would be called sin, you know what I mean? Like we're kind of afraid to call people out into their sin out of love. I heard a person, he was telling a story and he said, imagine you're on in this like town, but at the end of this road there's a dead end sign that's cut off because there was a break in the road, and if you went through it, you're surely gonna fall and die. Like you're surely gonna go out. He said, "What is loving somebody?
Right?
Is it to watch them come around that curve at 100 miles an hour to say, live your life, man, have fun." Or is it to try to jump out and help them, call them out of what they're in?
If their house was on fire, would you not, and they didn't know it, would you not go and say, the house is on fire?
Exactly.
One point that I made, I think I might have only done it in the second service, but I will certainly make it next week, is that you can't shame anyone into to the kingdom of God. And so when we find ourselves with our loved ones like that, I think we do have to have the courage to talk, because that is love, but to do it in a way that is meeting the person where they are and not shaming them, not minimizing the issues at hand, but out of love, confronting them. That's, you hear about interventions and things like that. And we're at various levels of where, addictive behavior or, whatever it might be. But at some point, there has to be some sort of intervention if you're really loving those people. And, if we don't, we get into something equally bad for us, which is codependent behavior.
Sure.
And we can find ourselves in there. It's like, don't talk to mama about her drinking because she's going to drink more. Well, at some point, we've got to have a boundary. This is not acceptable. You can't do it around me. You can't do it around my children or whatever.
Yeah.
And so...
Now, and I know
those are hard conversations. Though.
This is maybe a little bit away from where we're hoping to go. But if there are, like, if you see a drift in yourself, right, and somebody comes and calls you out, but if you also see a drift in somebody else and you need to call, so like, what are some appropriate ways to do that? I guess. Do you know what I mean? Because I agree with you. I don't think we should shame people.
Yeah.
Because their sin isn't any greater than a sin that I have or whatever. But I do think there's a calling out in love.
Yeah, I do, and I do think there's kind of a biblical model for this. Where Jesus says, you go and see that person in private, and talk to them about their concerns. If that behavior doesn't change, then you take a couple of church elders, I think it says, and go and have the conversation. And then it says, you cut that person off out of love. Because sometimes it takes that, the whole, I know you were in youth ministry all those years, I've had parents that had to practice tough love with their kids because over and over again, what they were doing was just enabling bad behavior. Right. And so say, no more, you cannot live here if you're going to do drugs. You cannot live here if you're going to, be in this destructive. And I know it can be very nuanced and complicated around there, but I do think there's a time where love does mean speaking directly with people and pointing out to them. And we'll see that next week in the sermon, if you want to get a head start looking the way that Nathan comes and confronts David about the problem, because God's going to send the prophet Nathan to confront David. And, and some people, they say a thing, I think in addiction that like until someone's hit bottom, sometimes until they're out, they're not. If they get so far out there and they think that they can control the whole thing, it's really hard for them to see that they need rescue. But I think maybe David was at a point where it's just like, I can't do this anymore. I need help. Yeah. And that's good for us. I think the better thing is to be proactive and have the self-awareness and the self-discipline going in to not allow ourselves to get that far away, but it happens. Yeah. And so for the individual, because there is embarrassment, there is shame. You have no idea how much debt I'm in. You have no idea how much porn I watch. Yeah. You have no idea how much I drink. You have no idea, you name it, whatever it is. Right. I need help, but not knowing how to help. And so I think that's where, as we as the body of Christ have got to have the kind of grace to be around them, to first of all be approachable and realize you can talk to me about it anyway, and create those environments and those spaces where people can get help and can live their best life. And our vision, of wanting to empower people for purpose, hope, and joy. That's really kind of what our church is seeking to be about. Yeah. To help people live their best lives. Yeah. And
I do want to say though that I think that finding those spaces, those like personal check marks of like keeping yourself in check is important, because I realize if you're like me, it's hard to bring people in sometimes unless I really, really, really trust, that I can go, I need you to help me be accountable. But sometimes when we isolate ourselves, we don't have somebody there that's going to pull aside and go, hey, you're kind of struggling or whatever. So to find that personal like line, which sounds weird, but how do we do that? Because I want to justify what I'm doing, so I'm having a hard time setting aside a line. But all these parts, like I guess I could see like places in my own life where I've justified things and I've isolated and I've accommodated to make sure like I can either keep doing what I'm doing or get out of what I'm doing and be relatively unscathed. But I never knew how to put those checks in my life.
Yeah. And this may be not exactly addressing your problem. So or what you're talking about. So if I can, help me double back to that. But I think the fact that is pretty much everybody, what you're describing to some level, we all feel like that. And so I think sometimes that's what keeps us from doing the loving thing to someone who is clearly drowning, because we're saying, well, like, who am I to say that? Well, how could I be judgmental? Because I've got my own issues right here.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's different strategies for different types of issues. But, as a preacher, I would just say I have sometimes reluctantly been called into a lot of sort of intervention kinds of things like, and sometimes the answer is just let them talk to the preacher and it's going to solve the problem. But, it is then trying to figure out the course. Is this something that we need to get this person to a treatment plan in, and sometimes it's the home environment is so difficult and it is sustaining their problems because they got so much codependence going on, then helping them find a way to get out of the relationships they're in. And it's difficult when it's family, it's family. And sometimes you have to kind of treat the whole family in the system, but, to help people understand, I know these are your friends, but you can't be around those friends anymore because you'll use, I use because I was thinking about one specific issue with Teresa and I actually had a guy that had a family in our church, but he had been in prison for drug addiction, and he got out, and kind of walking with him through that process was really, I had been on the periphery of it, but walking day with somebody who was who really wanted to be off drugs for his family, but just the difficult things of just living life and being in the environment of having to drive down a street where, right down there, I could deal with my stress by going down there because I know that's where I used to buy stuff, so it's tough, and I know I may be wandering all over the place, but I do think that there is a path. I do think there is a rescue, and it does, I think, start with the individual coming to recognize I need help, I need rescue, and I don't think if they can get to that step one, that you can go very much further. And so sometimes I think what we have to do is just say, well, this is a boundary I've got to put up. I can't watch you do this anymore.
Sure.
And we're talking about really serious stuff right now.
Yeah.
And just the subtlety of trying to give people joy in just the midst of what we would say a range of normal life is that we all deal with junk.
Yeah.
That we don't have to. Right?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. And I think, and maybe even in the case of David's story, is that a lot of times we do most of the problem to ourselves, and we don't mean to. It's not that we're a victim of circumstance only, but it's that sometimes we just end up in spots that we're not meant to be in.
Yeah.
And then we don't know how to figure our way out. So we're just trying our best. We're just flailing around and hoping, which if you think about how they tell you to get out of a rip current, your first instinct is to want to swim back to shore because you're out deep.
Yeah.
But that'll actually wear you out and tire you down.
Right.
The first thing is just to get out of the situation.
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like. But once you get out of the situation, they always tell you to swim to the side, swim horizontal to the beach. But like once you get out, then you can work your way. Not to say that there's not going to be any waves that are going to make it hard for you or whatever, but that's going to be the easiest track back to your normal is just getting out of the current circumstance. And you use the circumstance. I actually had a kid show up here, one of my former youth one time, about 3 or 4 years ago. He showed up and just, somebody came out, like as I pulled in for Wednesday night dinner, they said, "Hey, somebody's looking for you." And I walk in and I see him and I could tell, just doped up, you know what I mean? And so I ended up being like, okay, I need to get him out of here. So I actually ended up taking him to the hospital because he was in really bad shape. Like, he didn't even really know what was going on. He just knew to come to the church and look for me.
Yeah.
That was his best way of getting help he needed. So we walked through a process, and the first thing I told him is kind of what you were saying, is get out of here. Like, you got to get out of this area.
Yeah.
I was like, not that I don't want you around anymore, but you just have to get out of this area.
And you start,
because the people here aren't good for you. You know where to find all the bad stuff. You know what I mean? Like, ended up going and buying him a burger, taking him to the hospital, just got him fed, got him the physical help he needed. But then, I helped him get into a program because I didn't have the power. Like you said, sometimes it needs more help. And now he's off in another state. He's married, got kids, living a good life. And,
that's great. And, that's one of the privileges, I think, honors that of allow God gives to us who work on a church staff to allow us to be in a position where we get to be a part of those great stories.
Yeah.
But I want to bring it down. I know we're going a little long on this, but I do want to bring it down. We're talking about kind of extreme examples, or people that that have been in prison or that or need to be in rehab of some kind, of that kind of stuff. But there is just this practical, everyday living in the crud where we're flailing around in the rip current of things that could become more dangerous, but we need to get out of them before that happens. And they're not. I mean, it can be things like overspending or drinking a little bit too much, or, it's the flirtatious text with it. And identifying those things within ourselves. It is like, I think part of the comparison justification thing is to look at, well, that guy was on meth. I just, smoke, weed, 7 days a week or whatever,
Yeah.
So, we try to do this comparison thing. It is recognizing the behavior that is keeping us from living our best life, living our most abundant life. And I don't know if I made that point very clearly, but that's really my heart in all of this and doing this Riptide series is to help people just in a practical, average, everyday world to live a better life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to do that, it's about, making sure you're good, getting out of the spaces where there might be danger, but also finding the joy and hope of Christ.
And we've talked a lot about self-health.
Yeah.
Making sure we get rest and all that kind of stuff and have the right kind of systems around us to support that.
Yeah.
So,
well, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about next week?
Next week, we're finishing up the story of David.
Right.
And so, Nathan has a hard job of having to go and tell David. Being a prophet back then was because, prophets, ended up lots of times being pushed out into exile and stuff because they said very unpopular things. And he's talking to the most popular king and the most powerful person in the world at that time, and having to tell him some really hard truths.
Right.
But to David's credit, he heard him and he repented. And as I said, in last week's sermon or yesterday's sermon, this is a story that's got a lot of parts to it. Yeah. But the overarching thing, it is a story of redemption. Yeah. And that gives us hope, in how it ends up. So a lot of bad things happen. Some people lost their lives. Terrible things.
Yeah.
But it does point to God's grace and redemption. So that gives us hope for us. The only word I would say that if you're hearing this and you're like, you don't have to wait till next week. If you need help, reach out to us, reach out to somebody. If you find yourself in a rip current that you need to get help getting out of, reach out for help immediately.
Yeah. Time is of the essence. You don't need to sit in it longer to find out the end solution. We can help you get there.
That's right. Yeah.
Quicker.
Yeah. I'll just be tying it up in the third part of the sermon, but life happens, and so it's real. If it's real for you, get help.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, we appreciate you taking time to be with us here and to watch and take in. And if you have any stories of rip currents that maybe you've been a part of, or somebody that's been a part of, but you've watched God come beside and rescue, or you've been a part of some of that redemption story with them, let us know. We'd love to hear some of those stories shoot them to our email, deepdive@hickoryflat.org. Call us personally and talk to us. Drop a comment in the Facebook or YouTube area, wherever you're watching. And, this is it's a great time to connect because, again, we all struggle in this space. And we've all been caught in a rip current of some sort at some point, some more extreme than others, but we all can relate to this. And that's important to know. You're not alone if you feel like you're in a rip current right now. But yeah, we appreciate you guys watching, and
Sure. Yeah.
we'll catch you next time.
Yes. God bless.